All right. Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to Other World Connections. Let me get this camera set up. Ah. Ush. Running slightly late today. How you all doing out there? Yes, so this is Other World Connections. You're tuned into Revolution Radio, which is the #1 listener-supported internet radio station in the whole world. Believe it or not. And you were just listening to The New American Dream, hosted by Chuck Gregory. And you can catch him on Thursdays, 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Time, Studio A, right here on Revolution Radio. And this is, yes, as I was saying, a listener-supported station. So please consider helping our efforts and airtime by visiting the station's donation section on our website, revolution.radio. There are a number of ways in which you can donate. You can donate through Patreon, snail mail. The address is on the website there. You can make a direct payment through the station's credit union's online banking system called Autobooks. This is restricted to United States and Canada residents only. You can pay with cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Bitcoin Cash. What do you say about investing in gold, but having someone else look after the gold and then they pay you the dividends as the price fluctuates? What do you reckon about that? Just been talking with somebody about that. Let's put this telegram up. There. You can use DonorBox, an international alternative to PayPal. DonorBox.org/revolution-radio is the way to go there. Or you could consider advertising your product, service, body, just kidding, on the homepage. An additional method of fundraising for the station is the capacity to place an advertisement on the station's website for the very reasonable and extremely competitive sum of $25 a month. That gets a lot of traffic, I believe. Yeah. And a reminder that you can find, well, yeah. Hey, a reminder that this is video. I've gone to video. I am going to, getting a hello from my producer / wife here. Hello, Julia. There we go. Keeping it active there on the chat. I'm going to post the link to the video in the Discord server. So Revolution Radio is now on Discord. So you can come through into the chat on the Discord, and I think eventually you're going to be able to listen and watch and all that stuff. But for now, I will put in the Revolution Radio chat room the link to my channel on YouTube there. And that's the live video. You definitely don't need to watch, that's for sure. You can just listen along, but I am going to be playing some videos. So in today's show, we are going to have a look at a fairy tale, The Marvellous Musician from the Red Fairy book. And we're going to do a little bit of our decoding on that to just keep reviving and giving my energy to the fairy tales. Other world connections, we're going to be going back to focusing on that for the foreseeable future. Fairy tales contain a lot of the things that I'm interested in, and they are, I think, a key to our a key to freedom. Yes, they contain spiritual messages based on natural law and objective morality and how to behave or how to go about life. I think they work on many different levels. They are subjective in the sense that we are subjective to our experience around us in line or in under the operating system of natural law. So there are objective ways to behave, but we are subject to our circumstances and subject to our, our weaknesses and our strengths, and having to work on balancing them, or, integrating our shadow aspect and stuff like that. So we're all different, but the rules are kind of the same. And I think I believe that fairy tales came about from a time that all the good stuff about being a human being came from those ancient times where children were revered, and people were living life intuitively. People were living life objectively moral. They weren't causing harm to one another. They were living in these societies that were voluntary, I believe. And there was possibly a structure that everybody agreed on, that people weren't getting really abused. And people were spending plenty of time in reverence with the children and the families and the communities. And the intuitive, the artists and the writers and the dreamers and the seers and the so forth, I believe they're the ones that came up with the fairy tales. Perhaps they arrived at the same time as we did. That's what authors that try to go back and look at them kind of tend to say, because it's poetic, like a fairy tale can be. And I suppose we don't really know. But if we have to just assume that if a fairy tale exists, it came from the mind because of the natural law principle of mentalism, that all is mind. So if there's something, it must have been thought up by someone. And if it was God, well, maybe there's some magical tablet somewhere, but I think even if they came from God, a human being had to speak it into existence on the planet, and other people had to listen to it, and it had to affect them, and it had to stay in the collective consciousness, creative consciousness of humanity to make it this far down the track. And on top of that, books are being banned. Fairy tales are being censored, as people have an idea that, the violence or the inappropriateness of the content of fairy tales are not acceptable for children to hear. And so we move into, we're in a culture of indoctrination, whether it be the truth, whether it be natural law, whether it be some Marxist agenda in the educational institutions, all of the above. There's one theme that everybody has wrong with the kids, is that they should be indoctrinated. And indoctrinating children is instructing and trying to get them to literally understand, when really it should be a fantastical time for children. It should be a fairy tale time, a dress-up time, a pretend and dramatic play time, and playful and all that sort of thing. So that is the whole point. That bringing back fairy tales is bringing back blueprints for behavior, blueprints for morals, blueprints for spiritual truths into the culture. And that's what I'm trying to do here. And my decodings are very basic, and I think that's the point. There's no point. I think there's no point getting into esoteric stuff just to be esoteric. I think dealing with esoteric things is, I think the point of that is to make them, to de-esotericize them. Does that make sense? There's no point making them more confusing than they already are. Alright, so the Marvellous Musician. It would really help if I had the Red Fairy book open. I was rushing up to the computer. Right, Andrew Lang. I think I might... No, I won't. Okay. Here we are. Come on, Marvellous musician. There you are. Home scene. There we go. Marvellous musician happens to be right there. Okay. Stretch that out. So yeah, you can follow along if you must, if you wish, if you want, on YouTube. Otherwise, I'm just going to read this. That's all I'm going to do. Just got to get the size of the page correct. Oh. Alright. Oh, that'll have to do. Alright. Let's just read this. The Marvellous Musician. There was once, upon a time, a marvellous musician. One day he was wandering through a wood all by himself, thinking now of one thing, now of another, till there was nothing else left to think about. Then he said to himself, "Time hangs very heavily on my hands when I'm all alone in the wood. I must try and find a pleasant companion." So he took his fiddle out and fiddled till he woke the echoes round. After a time a wolf came through the thicket and trotted up to the musician. "Oh, it is a wolf, is it?" said he. "I have not the smallest wish for his society." But the wolf approached him and said, "Oh, my dear musician, how beautifully you play. I wish you'd teach me how it is done." "That's easily learned," answered the fiddler. "You must only do exactly as I tell you." "Of course I will," replied the wolf. "I can promise that you will find me a most apt pupil." So they joined company and went on their way together. And after a time they came to an oak tree, which was hollow and had a crack in the middle of the trunk. "Now," said the musician, "if you want to learn to fiddle, here's your chance. Lay your front paws in this crack." The wolf did as he was told, and the musician quickly seized a stone and wedged both his fore paws so firmly into the crack that he was held there, a fast prisoner. "Wait there till I return," said the fiddler, and he went on his way. After a time he said to himself again, "Time hangs very heavily on my hands. When I'm all alone in the wood, I must try and find a companion." So he drew out his fiddle and fiddled away lustily. Presently a fox slunk through the trees. "Aha! What have we here?" said the musician. "A fox. Well, I haven't the smallest desire for his company." The fox came straight up to him and said, "My dear friend, how beautifully you play the fiddle. I would like to learn how you do it." "Nothing easier," said the musician, "if you'll promise to do exactly as I tell you." "Certainly," answered the fox. "You have only to say the word." "Well then, follow me," replied the fiddler. When they had gone a bit of the way, they came to a path with high trees on each side. Here the musician halted, bent a stout hazel bow down to the ground from one side of the path, and put his foot on the end of it to keep it down. Then he bent a branch down from the other side and said, "Give me your left front paw, my little fox, if you really wish to learn how it's done." The fox did as he was told, and the musician tied his front paw to the end of one of the branches. "Now, my friend," he said, "give me your right paw." This he bound to the other branch. Having carefully seen that his knots were all secure, he stepped off the ends of the branches and they sprang back, leaving the poor fox suspended in mid-air. "Just you wait where you are till I return," said the musician, and he went on his way again. Once more he said to himself, "Time hangs heavily on my hands when I am all alone in the wood. I must try and find another companion." So he took out his fiddle and played as merrily as before. This time a little hare came running up at the sound. "Oh, here comes a hare," said the musician. "I've not the smallest desire for his company." "How beautifully you play, dear Mr. Fiddler," said the little hare. "I wish I could learn how you do it." "It's easily learnt," answered the musician. "Just do exactly as I tell you." "That I will," said the hare. "You will find me a most attentive pupil." They went on a bit together, till they came to a thin part of the wood, where they found an aspen tree growing. The musician bound a long cord round the little hare's neck, the other end of which he fastened to the tree. "Now, my merry little friend," said the musician, "run 20 times round the tree." The little hare obeyed, and when it had run 20 times round the tree, the cord had twisted itself 20 times round the trunk, so that the poor little beast was held, a fast prisoner, and it might bite and tear as much as it liked, it could not free itself, and the cord only cut its tender neck. "Wait there till I return," said the musician, and went on his way. In the meantime the wolf had pulled and bitten and scratched at the stone, till at last he succeeded in getting his paws out. Full of anger, he hurried after the musician, determined when he met him to tear him to pieces. When the fox saw him running by, he called out as loud as he could, "Brother Wolf, come to my rescue! The musician has deceived me too." The wolf pulled the branches down, bit the cord in two, and set the fox free. So they went on their way together, both vowing vengeance on the musician. They found the poor imprisoned little hare, and having set him free also, they all set out to look for their enemy. During this time the musician had once more played his fiddle, and had been more fortunate in the result. The sounds pierced the ears of a poor woodman, who instantly left his work, and with his hatchet under his arm came to listen to the music. "At last I've got a proper sort of companion," said the musician, "for it was a human being I wanted all along, and not a wild animal." And he began playing so enchantingly that the poor man stood there as if bewitched, and his heart leapt for joy as he listened. And as he stood thus, the wolf and fox and little hare came up, and the woodman saw at once that they meant mischief. He lifted his glittering axe and placed himself in front of the musician, as much as to say, "If you touch a hair of his head, beware, for you will have to answer for it to me." Then the beasts were frightened, and they all three ran back into the wood, and the musician played the woodman one of his best tunes, by way of thanks, and then continued his way. Right, now this one is just dripping with, I don't get the feel of what this really means from reading it. So it's like more research required, but I do get this feeling that, that the structure of the story, it's kind of begging for, introspection and, more research and looking into it. I think. I feel like it's scratching an itch that wants to be scratched more. Does that make sense? Just a hello to Metal Rabbit in the chat. Yeah, so this one is a really good one. I did this in the past, and we're just going to go over it again with a fresh set of ears. First off, the wolf. First off, I think that the animals, I think, my approach would be much how like animal symbolism works. I think that animals are here to help us. The whole animal spirit guides thing, I absolutely do buy into that. I bought into that through doing my teaching work, and then I started to get these synchronicity type things, and I started looking into symbolism, and animals and children are very much in vibe with each other. I think we are too. We just lost that a bit from our childhood indoctrination. The point of the story is, I feel like when there's a clear-cut story like this, when there's a man and he's dealing with animals that are anthropomorphized, I feel they represent aspects of the self, or of the the person, or if you just as an example, a person. That's like my first thought about this story. Yeah. So the wolf symbolizes being expressive in your communication. If you think about how a wolf communicates, when you think of wolf, you think of howling at the moon and doing that growling, showing your teeth. So wolves are very expressive and communicative, right? Or they're howling, and I just at a glance, or if you just think about it for a moment, they probably seem noisier than like a dog. I haven't met many wolves, but you get what I'm saying. So about being expressive in your communication, and by adding more body language and vocal inflection. And yes, I don't remember how I got this, maybe just thinking about it for ages, but the wolf being tied down to the hollow tree. And also the wolf being like a noisy kind of animal. That's kind of reflective of the violin itself, right? So he's tied to the tree, body in resonance, and it's a hollow tree. Yeah, it's like a violin. So that's there's like a weird kind of correspondence there. The fox is related to like the senses and feel, like to sense and feel, like about trusting your senses. Obviously foxes are very kind of agile and sensory. And then the fox is tied to the bow. Again, it's like I think a bow is like a loose like a you know what? I'm gonna just put this on the old internet. My first thought was it's like a willow, like a willow tree. Yeah, it's an arm as opposed to a branch of a tree. So like the bow, it's like willows have bows, I believe. They're more like ropey, dangly, stretchy branches, right? Rather than a rigid branch. So there's this weird, there's a sort of a rippling, like there's a plurality of the violin in the story, which is just, I don't know, it just boggles my mind. That's what I'm saying. So the fox gets tied to the bow, which represents like the string tension of the violin. So there's another sort of thing, plural of the violin going on inside the story, where not only the foxes, and like I haven't even looked at the trees, where different trees symbolize different things, right? See where the feeling goes with the string tension, yep, like a violin, like so. So I guess this is probably most about the violin. And the hare represents natural wit and intelligent choices, and the hare was tied to a string and ran around the tree. So the pegs of the violin, that's where you tune, you tighten the string. And so the hair kind of represents the peg of the tree as he was wound around the tree. So there's the tree as a adjacent to the violin, which is in the story. So tree as violin, and hollow tree is at that. And we've done it. We've done at least one episode on hollow trees and the power and importance of hollow trees in reality, where you can, if you want to get your hippie on, you can actually connect with a hollow tree, where the hollow space is somewhere you can offload, almost like a confessional perhaps, or express your feelings or frustrations, or offload something much like you would do to a person. But trees are willing to be like a doormat in a way for people. They're just pretty much pure love expression and service expression for humans, and perpetual forgiveness. So they don't actually mind that you kind of treat them bad. So it's good to do that to a hollow tree in like acknowledgement of those things. So then you're kind of treating a tree as like a friend, and you're kind of saving that sort of psychic vampirism from one of your friends and just giving it to the tree. And trees are happy that they're being kind of engaged with in a way that they've been acknowledged. Does that make sense? And that's in my opinion, like, yeah, true. Like, trees are mystical, magical, have been around since forever and before us, and they make up a network around really the whole planet with the fungi, right? And we know a lot about trees, how they communicate and stuff, and how sensitive they are. So trees are magic as well. That's all I'm saying. So the violin symbolizes being free and clear of problems, happiness and elegance. And the thing about a violin meaning that is that a violin's really, really hard to master. So when you hear a good violinist playing the violin, well, it's free and clear of problems. And it also kind of alludes to like hard work to get to that point, right? Happiness and elegance, so sort of some kind of mastery of life in a way, where you're free and you're happy and you're clear. And free is a big word, right? Because we talk about freedom, planetary freedom, freedom where we're not being ruled, and it does correspond to being, taking rulership of yourself. So clearing out those problems and stuff, freeing your own mind. And so the violin actually symbolizes all of those things. And happiness and elegance, because a violin is elegant, and violins, well, they can sound sad, but usually when you think of the violin, especially in a fairy tale or in the olden days, they're usually a festive instrument for parties and happiness and jolliness. So that they symbolize all that. Yes. So if the hair is wit and intelligent choices, that's to do with the thoughts, right? And that's those on the pegs of the violin. You're going to get those pegs right to get your tuning right, to get in tune. So you're actually able to feel and act right. Okay, so this is a kind of trivium type message, perhaps. I think the shoe fits really well. The fox, your feelings, sensory. Trust your senses to guide you. And also so we'll stick with that. So that's like the emotions, right? And then there's the wolf, and that's to do with action, being expressive in your communication, adding more body language and vocal inflection. So the wolf kind of represents actions, because the wolf, fox, and the hare are all working in the threes here. And the story repeats in that way because I think there's a triumvirate, if that's the word that you use, is like a threes thing. And a lot of these fairy tales and old tales have a repeating theme, and then like the anthropomorphized being or whatever changes. And I think that's where it's a sign that there's multiple aspects to a certain theme that they're trying to a certain message that they're trying to portray in a deeper message in the fairy tales. So we're looking at this as the hare, the fox, and the wolf, representing the thoughts, the emotions, and the actions, and this is amplified by or pluralized by the violin. And then the man's engaging with that, and there's also the man's like alone in the woods, and he's struggling, right? He's lonely, he wants to find a friend, he's finding it tough. And he meets these challenges, and I think these challenges is like sort of in life you're having to make the right choices and having to trust your gut feeling about things so you don't lose your way. And also, having a bit of the wolf as in like taking like action and letting that stuff out, letting how you think and feel out, as like the expression of your life, right? And there's a sort of hint to being it's like responding to hardships and challenges with action, that sort of thing. So yeah, that's really it. That's just really kind of a quick one. And the woodcutter, shows up. So he gets his thoughts under control. He controls, like he sorts out the hare. He gets his feelings under control. He sorts out the fox. And all of these were to do with, and he sorts out the wolf. He gets his communication and expressions and body language and action and word, his action under control. Because the hare and the fox and the wolf were all challenges for him. He didn't trust them, and he's in the forest, and they're all up to something, kind of thing. And he dealt with kind of the threats of being in the forest alone, and he reached his goal of finding a friend, the woodcutter. And the woodcutter represents the forces, the powerful forces that come to your aid when you get your thoughts and your emotions and actions right and aligned to your path, or we say natural law. There's not really anything that shows that, but I think it comes down to like a common sense type of thing, that an alignment, an alignment in the self of your thoughts and emotions and actions. There's a correspondence to an alignment to common sense and to universal truths and to natural law and to doing the right thing, because if you're thinking right, you're feeling right, and you're acting right. The violin being free and clear of problems, with happiness and elegance. You got everything going, firing on all cylinders and in alignment. And I think that's what, that's a good way of looking at the deeper meaning of that story. So there we have it. Triumvirate. Yes. It was a big word that came out of my mouth. I surprised myself. All right. Where are we now? Well, we're flying through this first hour. I had a little timeline here. Yes. Well, we'll start this video. We're going to have to pause when we come to the ad break, but we're now going to look at, because that was a Brothers Grimm story, we're now going to look at, just going to watch a video, if you don't mind. So you can tune in on to the YouTube. I've just posted the link. Yeah, the link's just on the Revolution Radio chat room chat. You can click on there. Until I figure out a way you can actually watch it on the Discord, that would be good. I don't want to pull people away from Discord, but there you go. So on the video, and I'll also just post the link. Just if I'm going to post the link to the video we're going to watch, in case you, well, don't want to watch, and you're interested to watch later. There we go. Oh no, well that's one. That wasn't the one that I wanted to show you. Excuse me. Maybe I'll delete that. Let me delete that. Come on Gino, sort it out, mate. Delete it. I'll put that one up soon because we're going to watch that next. I just found one that was really interesting called The Brothers Grimm, Are They Really for Children? And I want to see what that person has to say, and that might just elicit some of my views in a better, more entertaining way while we're sort of responding to a video being played. I'm going to be curious to see what that lady thinks, and I'm going to be able to respond. So let's try and paste this there. Let's see if we got it right. Yeah, Once Upon a Time, Brothers Grimm. It's basically a documentary. So yeah, I'm just going to press play.
Grimm's Fairy Tales. After the Bible, the world's most widely read book, translated into over 100 languages and found in almost every home where there are children. The educational motive of these tales is unmistakable. Cruel though they often are, in the end, wickedness is always punished, goodness rewarded, and the world set to rights again. The fact that problems are worked out in a miraculous way does not diminish the value of...
Okay, sorry. That's the audio. Just one moment. What am I trying to do? I'm trying to get the... There it is. There we go. Okay, here it is. Video on the page. Now. Alright, excuse me guys. Here we go.
Grimm's Fairy Tales. After the Bible, the world's most widely read book, translated into over 100 languages and found in almost every home where there are children. The educational motive of these tales is unmistakable. Cruel though they often are, in the end, wickedness is always punished, goodness rewarded, and the world set to rights again. The fact that problems are worked out in a miraculous way does not diminish the value of these tales. Indeed, it constitutes the fascination they exercise, even on adults.
Once upon a time,
The fairy tale land of the Brothers Grimm. The Brothers Grimm were born in Hanau, a medium-sized town situated on the river Main, not far from Frankfurt. Jacob in 1785 and Wilhelm 1 year later. Their major achievement was to collect and record the old German folk tales, thus ensuring that they'd not be forgotten. It was in the heart of Germany, in the state of Hesse, that they discovered the sources for their collection. Journeying through this landscape in the treks of the Brothers Grimm, we'll meet Little Red Riding Hood and the Sleeping Beauty, Hansel and Gretel, the Frog King and Snow White, and recall the days when our grandmothers used to tell us fairy tale stories. Stories that usually began once upon a time.
In
For centuries, these tales were handed down orally, told when people were spinning or in the evenings after work, in front parlors and laborers' cottages, and of course, to children before they went to sleep. They were not to be found in books.
Sie hatten 12 Kinder. Es waren lauter Buben. Eines Tages sagte der König zur Königin.
Shortly after Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm were born, their father left Hanau and moved to the small town of Steinau on the road from Leipzig to Frankfurt, the old east-west trade route. Steinau was not an arbitrary choice. 4 generations of the Grimm family lived and worked here. Friedrich Grimm, the boys' great-grandfather, was the church superintendent of Steinau. Their grandfather was the clergyman. From 1730 to 1777, he christened and buried all the reformist parishioners of the town. Father Grimm was the local magistrate, and his sons, here Jacob as a child, grew up in surroundings they would remember fondly in later life. The magistrate's house in which the family lived, the well, the garden, the linden tree. The boys regarded their home as an island of peace, their oasis, as they called it. Many years later, Wilhelm was to write, "The countryside around Steinau is pleasant. We often used to go into the meadowed valleys and up on the hills. Our feeling for nature may well be inborn, as it is with others, but it was in this way that it was nourished and fostered." In the early years of the 19th century, the brothers studied law at Marburg. In the old city, with its castle, its half-timbered houses, its steep lanes, its Renaissance gables and slate-tiled roofs, they discovered an atmosphere that must have had a considerable influence on their later work. They often went for long walks during their years at university. Wilhelm, in particular, delighted in going out in good weather. And Jacob Grimm penned this praise: "Oh, a splendid landscape, more romantic and beautiful at every step. Mountains and hills decked in every shade of green, meadows and little streams. Before me, a village so veiled in trees, one would not suspect its presence were it not betrayed by the smoke climbing from its chimneys." Inspired by their experience of nature and the landscape and by the themes of folklore, the brothers wrote, "Man has been given a good angel, who, when he sets out in life, will accompany him in the familiar form of a fellow wanderer. This benevolent companion is the inexhaustible asset of folk tales and legends." At the home of their revered professor of jurisprudence, Friedrich Karl von Savigny, they made the acquaintance of Clemens Brentano and Achim von Arnim. These two writers were working on a collection of old German songs with the title Des Knaben Wunderhorn. This meeting was the stimulus. Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm now started their own collection of songs, legends, and folk tales. 1812 saw the publication of the first volume of their Kinder- und Hausmärchen, but it was to be 7 years before all 900 copies of the edition were sold. That was a disappointing start, but the Grimm brothers pressed on with their task. Jacob Grimm circulated an appeal to others to participate in the work of collection. This was the first public appeal ever made in the field of folklore studies. Sadly, the response failed to match his expectations. The circular was not immediately successful. But whatever tales the Grimms heard told in farming families and middle-class homes, from teachers and storytellers, they wrote down, retaining their original flavor, the fascination of the simple, symbolic language in which they were related.
Close by the king's castle was a large, dark forest, and in this forest, under an old linden tree, there was a well. On very hot days, the king's daughter would go out into the forest and sit on the cool rim of the well. And when she was bored, she would take her golden ball and throw it up in the air and catch it. This was her favorite plaything. Now one day it happened that the golden ball did not fall back into the hand she was stretching up for it, but straight into the water. The princess followed it with her eyes, but the ball vanished, and the well was deep, so deep that the bottom could not be seen.
The Frog King is the first story in the first volume of the Grimm Brothers collection, and it's one of the best known. Your clothes, your pearls and jewels, and your golden crown mean nothing to me. But if you will love me, and let me be your companion and playmate, sit with you at your little table and eat off your little golden plate and drink from your little glass and sleep in your little bed, if you promise all this, I shall climb down and bring you back your golden ball. The frog's speaking with a human voice because he's been bewitched. Goat kids emerging intact from the wolf's stomach, apples talking from trees, and loaves of bread from the oven, tales told to children ever since they first started listening.
If you're not sure what a good budget is, Google Ads can suggest one.
Quiet woods, fields and meadows, the silvery shimmer of summer grasses, the glowing cornfields, a landscape to stimulate the imagination, a setting for the wonderful events of fairy stories. A town straight out of a picture book. Here is the atmosphere of the tale of Rapunzel.
Rapunzel was the most beautiful child under the sun. When she was 12 years old, the sorceress locked her into a tower which had neither stairs nor doors, only a small high window at the top. When the sorceress wanted to enter, she stood below and cried, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair." Rapunzel had wonderful long hair, as fine as spun gold. And when she heard the voice of the sorceress, she unfastened her braids and wound her hair round a hook on the window. Her tresses fell down 20 ells, and the sorceress climbed up on them. When the old woman realized that the king's son was climbing up to Rapunzel at night, she clutched the beautiful tresses in her rage, wound them several times around her left hand, seized the scissors, and snip, snap, cut them all off.
Here are the rivers and streams of Grimm's fairy tales, the forests and meadows, the towns and villages, and, above all, the palaces and castles in which lived the noble princes and the beautiful princesses.
It so happened that the king gave orders for a feast that was to last 3 days, and to which all the beautiful maidens in the country were invited, so that his son could choose himself a bride.
It doesn't take much imagination here to conjure up Cinderella and her stepsisters, winsome and fair of face, but wicked and black of heart.
Cinderella had to work hard from dawn till dusk, rising before daybreak to carry water, light the fires, cook, and wash. Besides this, her sisters wronged her in every conceivable way, throwing her peas and lentils into the ashes so that she was forced to stoop down and pick them out again. And they mocked the poor stepchild, shouting, "Now look at the proud princess, the way she's dressed up," and laughed and were well pleased with themselves. "We're going to the wedding at the king's palace."
One of the most talented and dependable storytellers was Dorothea Fiemann. She lived in this house in a village near Kassel. "It was one of those happy chances," wrote Wilhelm Grimm in 1819, "that we met a countrywoman who told us the most and the best stories." The house has now been renovated and the street names are reminiscent of Grimm's fairy tales. Another source of old stories was Jeanette Hassenpflug. She was one of the brothers' circle of friends in Kassel. And then there was Dragoon Guard Krause, who lived in this little village. We know from his letters that he told the Grimm brothers stories and was rewarded with gifts of cast-off clothes. From 1798 to 1830, apart from their student years, Jacob and Wilhelm lived in this house in Kassel. The years in Kassel were largely devoted to collecting folk tales, a task in which they were helped by their large circle of friends. This is the manuscript copy of the first edition of 1812, with annotations by the Grimm brothers and notes on who told them the stories and when and where. From Mähnchen, 20th October 1811. Mähnchen was Wilhelmina von Schwerzell. Wilhelm Grimm often visited her and her family in the manor house at Willingshausen. Friederike Mannel was another member of the circle. She was the daughter of a clergyman in a village in the Schwalm Valley. This note says Dortchen, 19th of January 1812. Dortchen was Dorothea Wild, one of the most industrious collectors of stories. She was later to become Wilhelm's wife. In the home of the von Baumbach family at Nentershausen, she recorded some attractive tales to bring back to Kassel. And it was Dorothea who discovered one of the best-known stories in the Grimm collection, Hansel and Gretel.
Well, dear children, how nice of you to come and visit me. Well, we didn't come to visit you. We're lost. And we hope you'll show us the way home. Oh, yes, of course. And what are your names? I'm Gretel. And I'm Hansel. Hansel and Gretel. I see.
Though they're not built of bread or roofed with cakes, and their windows are not made of clear sugar, some of the cottages in the forests of Hesse do remind one of the Babes in the Wood and the Wicked Witch. A little stable, such as the witch might have kept Hansel captive in, can be found here too.
All right, thanks so much for tuning in. You're listening to Otherworld Connections here on Revolution.radio. Studio A. Stick around and we'll see you on the other side of the ad break. We'll finish off this Brothers Grimm documentary thingy. Alright, welcome back to Otherworld Connections, and you're tuned in to Revolution.Radio. This is Studio A, and yes, Revolution Radio is a little listener-supported radio station. Yeah, so, yeah, please consider helping our effort, supporting our efforts in airtime by visiting the station's donation section on our website, revolution.radio. Please and thank you. We're in the middle of a little Brothers Grimm documentary. I recommend watching along, or I've put the link into the chat, Revolution Radio chat on Discord. Yeah, it's pretty nice to watch. So we're going to finish that off. So let's keep going.
In some Hesse villages, women still bake their bread in the old bakehouses, with ovens like the one in which the old woman wanted to cook poor Hansel.
First, we shall do the baking, said the old woman. I've already kneaded the dough and heated up the oven.
At church on a feast day in a Schwalm village, you might well see Little Red Riding Hood.
Once upon a time, there was a dear little girl who was loved by all who set eyes on her. She wore a little cap of red velvet, and because it suited her so well that she never wore any other, she was called Little Redcap. One day, her mother said, "Come, Little Redcap, here is some cake and a bottle of wine. Take them to your grandmother. But mind how you go, and don't stray from the path, or you'll fall down and break the bottle, and there would be nothing for Granny."
On the altar of the main church in Bad Wildungen, the kings wear crowns decked with lilies and splendid robes of gold thread, once reminded of the dress in the fairy tale.
Allerleirauh went into her closet and took off her mantle of fur. Then she brought out her dress that shone like the sun and shimmered like the moon.
The altar is splendidly decked. The festive table at Allerleirauh's wedding might well have looked like this. And here we see that faith and imagination transformed the earth into a fresh green meadow and the sky into a golden paradise. A tiny fragment of this paradise is captured and held very fast in the words,
And they lived happily and contentedly ever after.
On the road between Kassel and Marburg, both places in which the Grimm brothers lived for many years, lies the imperial town of Fritzlar, with a history stretching back over 1,000 years. The romantic marketplace, with its Roland fountain, looking almost untouched since the Middle Ages. Below the old stone bridge between the Eder and the Mühlbach, everything seems to be just as it was 200 years ago when the Grimm brothers were born. Chickens and turkeys, ducks and geese stray along the riverbanks. These egg layers and potential Sunday dinners used to exercise people's imaginations, as is evident from the folk tales about them.
Once upon a time, a rooster and a hen decided to travel. The rooster built a handsome cart with 4 red wheels and harnessed 4 mice to it. The hen got in with the rooster, and off they drove.
Here is the home of the Dwarf King, where he ruled of his dwarf subjects. Is this perhaps the realm of the giants?
As he was sitting there, a great giant came over the hill. "Do you see that ogre there?" said the father. intending to scare his son into being good. He's coming to take you away.
And this is where the elves once lived.
Dear little naked mannequins who came hopping and dancing and leaping and took over all the work. They immediately started to stitch and sew and hammer, and they did not stop until everything was finished and ready.
Only a generation or so ago, work was indeed very hard in the villages of Hesse. Many people would have welcomed a visit from the little people, such as they paid to the cobbler in the fairy tale.
A shoemaker had become so poor that he had nothing left but the leather for one pair of shoes. He cut them out in the evening and then went to bed, intending to continue his work the next morning. But when he got up to start work, there stood the shoes on the table, already made and nicely finished.
Nothing is impossible in fairy tales. Beautiful girls are turned into geese, bewitched princesses herd geese, a goose herd wins a king's crown in the realm of the dead, and his geese are transformed into white sheep. Dwarves live under roots. Weird rocks are really princes turned into stone, or giants. In fairy tales, the underdog is given a chance. Little Däumling survives perilous adventures to win the king's daughter and a sack of gold. The valiant little tailor tricks the giant and gains his respect.
I am the giant. What sort of midget are you?
I am the valiant little tailor.
Valiant little tailor? What's that? You're so small, you can't be valiant.
Then read my belt.
Read your belt?
7 at one blow.
You must be as strong as a bear.
I am the strongest in the land.
Then if you're so strong, perhaps you can help me carry a tree.
Nothing easier.
What will you carry?
The branches, of course.
The heavy branches with all their leaves?
Yes, I'll carry them, and you take the trunk on your shoulders.
Look, that tree down there. We'll carry that. Just a moment.
You put the tree on your shoulder.
I'll just get it on my shoulder. Taylor?
I'm right here.
Taylor, help me. It's so heavy. Can you manage, Taylor?
Yes, of course.
How strong the tailor must be.
Sleeping Beauty is the story of a princess bewitched by a wicked fairy. It could have been at the Sababurg, near Kassel, that she lay in 100 years' sleep.
All round the palace, a hedge of thorns began to grow. It grew taller every year, and finally it surrounded and covered the whole palace so that nothing more of it could be seen, not even the royal standard on the rooftop. From time to time, kings' sons came and tried to break through the hedge to reach the palace, but they could not get through because the thorns clutched at them like hands and trapped the young men.
Da kam ein junger Königssohn, 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 der kam
15th century, the Landgraves of Hesse laid out a park for wild animals in the fields and meadows below their hunting lodge. There's a modern-day zoo at the Sababurg now. Beneath the centuries-old oaks, many a wanderer may have been startled by owls flying out. Perhaps the strange tales told of these nocturnal birds stem from such experiences.
A few hundred years ago, a strange event occurred. By some chance, one of the great owls, known as horned owls, flew from the neighboring woods into a barn in the town and did not dare to fly out of this retreat again. When the servant entered the barn the next morning, he was so terrified at the sight of the owl that he ran away and told his master there was a monster in the barn.
Fairy tales are a curious blend of the gruesome and the comic, good fairies and wicked ones, summer and winter.
In winter, when the snow lay deep on the ground, a poor boy had to go out with a sledge to fetch wood. And when he had gathered the wood, he was so frozen with cold, he did not want to go home until he had made a fire and warmed himself a little. He scraped the snow away, and when he had cleared the ground, he discovered a tiny golden key. Where there is a key, there must be a lock, he thought. So he dug into the earth and found a little iron chest. If only the key would fit, he thought. No doubt there's something precious in that chest. He tried it, and the key fitted exactly. So he turned it once, and now we must wait till he has finished unlocking it and opened the lid, and then we shall find out what wonderful things lay in that little chest.
The tale of the Golden Key is the 200th and the last of Grimm's fairy tales, tales which are still read and related all over the world. The collections and scholarly studies of the Brothers Grimm were of great value in rescuing German folklore from neglect. The Grimms did pioneer work for the history of literature.
Quite an abrupt ending there. I thought it was almost like it was just getting started, but it was really just a window into the world of, well, that little part of the world that they were from. Yes. Well, it's amazing how fairy tale-esque the area of the German countryside where they grew up and they lived. Wow, it's just amazing. And then seeing just the Germanic culture there, the puppet shows and the rituals and the things that they would do, and the bread baking, that is just, well, first I want to say, isn't it weird seeing that so many white people on the TV? But you know what I mean? It is really nice to just see a European cultural documentary, just to see, culture of Indo-Europeans. It is nice to see. I mean, there's a culture there, and it's good to be reminded that there is that. And I would like to live in a world that has more of that for Indo-Europeans, right? Nothing wrong with puppet shows and baking bread, having geese and turkeys and stuff running around freely by the river, and just community spirit. And it is around, but I think it is disappearing. And I believe fairy tales are going to play a role in that. And I think there's something in all that is what motivated the Brothers Grimm to do what they did. So, 40 minutes left. I want to move on to another video. I want to see, just out of curiosity, I've been starting to look for Brothers Grimm related material on the internet. I will say that I've got to fight these ads off, so as we watch there'll be ad interruptions thanks to YouBoob, which has been really bad. I don't know if you guys spend time. I've been looking through, what I'm trying to say is I've been looking at Odyssey, and I do think we need more of YouTube content on Odyssey, not only just to avoid the ads, but just to promote a platform that is just not so evil. Let's face it. You know, it's not just a blood money thing. So yeah, looking at stuff on YouTube, I've noticed in esoteric circles, pagan circles, people sharing videos about fairy tales, and I've noticed that some of these videos are incorrect, or they don't go very deep. I think if you need, and part of the point of that is, if you're making content for YouTube, you actually are sacrificing time that could be spent on actually gaining knowledge. So it's a paradox. It's that I think some of the people that should be really doing YouTube videos, I'm not speaking for me, I'm just speaking generally, well then they're spending their time gaining the knowledge. And some of these videos about, oh, the truth about Rumpelstiltskin or Jack and the Beanstalk, actually, they're way off. They're way off, and probably doesn't take that much to figure that out, reading a few different versions of Jack and the Beanstalk, just as an example, because there are a number of versions that are considered to be the quote-unquote original, and then taking from those original versions and saying, what do they all have in common that the newer versions don't, and that's really the part that's been left out, and why? Whew. The point of that is, this video we're going to watch is called The Brothers Grimm and Dark Fairy Tales, and the thumbnail, which I've lost, is something about like, are these really for children? And this might, you know, this is going to prompt a bit of a monologue on my part, maybe dialogue, if Mr. Metal Rabbit's still there in the chat, just about, you know, our opinions on, you know, are they really bad or not? And I'm interested to see Jess of the Shire channel, what she thinks, and I might respond to that. So let's go.
Ooh, home loans.
Oh, this is ads.
Easy boy. A squirrel mortgage
And yeah,
advisor
YouTube
will
doesn't
help
let
you.
you skip,
And that's
and I
the
don't
squirrel
like
effect.
this.
Squirrel?
And you got to sit through 2 ads now before you can skip. This is in New Zealand. Is it like that for you?
If you're
Where you
not
are?
sure what a good
oh
budget
my
is,
goodness!
Google Ads.
Pressing mute. Okay, skip.
Or maybe it was one of the many adaptations, spoofs,
Hang on,
and
let's go to 0.
this video has been sponsored by Squarespace.
Oh my gosh.
I seriously doubt
is how
that
bad it
any
is.
of us have managed to reach adulthood without hearing at least a few fairy tales. Maybe it was the story of Little Red Riding Hood, or Cinderella, or Jack and the Beanstalk, or maybe it was one of the many adaptations, spoofs, and edgy 2010 retellings that were inspired by those original stories. And not to stereotype you guys, but if you're watching this video, I bet you know that a lot of those modern fairy tales originated from the collection of the Brothers Grimm. Today, I want to take a deeper look at the life and times of the Grimm brothers, investigate some of their more obscure and perhaps disturbing stories, to try and pin down why they made it their life's work to study and preserve something as silly and inconsequential as fairy tales. Jakob Ludwig Karl Grimm was born on January 4th, 1785 in Hanau, a city in what we now know as Germany. Just about a year later, on February 24th, 1786, his brother, Wilhelm Karl Grimm, was born, and due to their closeness in age, the brothers were incredibly close growing up. They were basically twins, except that they shared the middle name Karl instead of the womb. While their family had never been particularly poor, their stations improved considerably in 1791, when the father of the family was elected Amtmann, which is basically a magistrate, of the city of Steinau. This gave them land to live on, a quite beautiful house, and a rather stable income. The brothers flourished in Steinau with private tutors to teach them reading and writing, a nursemaid to tell them stories, and the entirety of the German countryside at their fingertips. Okay, and I have been saying the German countryside, but technically where they were living was not Germany yet. This was before the unification of Germany, when the country was still split up into much smaller kingdoms, each with their own leader, still under the larger umbrella of the Holy Roman Empire, as they had been for over 1,000 years. I will be continuing to refer to the regions that would eventually become Germany as Germany, just for the sake of simplicity, but you should probably be aware that technically it was not Germany until 1815. However, it is interesting to note that the abundance of random small kings and kingdoms in the time of the Holy Roman Empire may have contributed to the environment of the fairy tales that the Brothers Grimm would collect and retell, where there's always a king and a princess and a castle. But their peaceful countryside upbringing could not remain peaceful. There was a lot of chaos in Europe at this time, the French Revolution was going on, and things were only about to get more chaotic in the personal lives of Jakob and Wilhelm Grimm. In 1796, their father died of pneumonia, leaving 11-year-old Jakob as the man of the house. Because their father, the Amtmann, was gone, they lost possession of the house they had lived in, and they got a very small stipend from the government in his memory, but it was not enough to support them. Their mother, Dorothea, was unemployed at the time, but they were able to just barely scrape by with a lot of monetary support from family members. Their greatest support would come from their aunt, who was wealthy enough to provide for Jakob and Wilhelm to attend a special school in the city of Kassel. This was the opportunity of a lifetime, but it did present its own unique challenges. Despite their private tutoring, educationally speaking, the Grimm brothers were far behind their peers, and compared to the other rich, noble boys that attended this school, they were country bumpkins. They stuck out like a sore thumb. And constantly pressing on them was this feeling that even though they were children themselves, between Wilhelm and Jakob was the responsibility of being the man of the house. Through hard work and a lot of focus, they managed to claw their way through school, becoming just as educated as their classmates, and in 1802, Jakob was accepted into university. While this was a great step forward for him, it also meant that for the very first time, the Grimm brothers would have to be separated. This was a heartbreaking blow for them. They had basically been connected at the hip since they had been born, and now suddenly they were entirely alone. We still have a lot of their letters that they exchanged from this time, where they're expressing to each other the pure heartbreak that they feel being completely alone without each other. Jakob was doing quite well in university, but Wilhelm, who had suffered from scarlet fever when he was much younger, was constantly plagued by poor health. He was bedridden for a full 6 months, not allowed to read or write, only able to draw and to dream to pass the time. And while this was obviously quite difficult, Wilhelm would later explain how much this time of intense boredom would spark his creativity and his curiosity. Fortunately, the brothers were soon reunited as Wilhelm went up to university, and it was there that the two of them fell under the tutelage of Professor Friedrich von Savigny. Savigny nurtured the spark he saw in the brothers, urging them to be mindful and thorough in their scholarship, and pointing them in the direction of specifically German art, culture, and knowledge. This was at odds with the more classical university curriculum, which emphasized the study of the art and history of Rome and Greece, and Savigny was likely inspired by the growing wave of Romanticism in Europe. The movement known as Romanticism was just starting to pick up steam in the early 1800s, and it sought to do away with all pretension and get to the heart of what it meant to be human. The art and literature of Romanticism attempted to eschew the subject of the rich and famous and focus on simplicity, on the ordinary person and their very ordinary lives. They thought that in this simplicity, in going back to our roots, we might find some answers, some kind of universal truth that might guide us through rapidly changing times. This meant setting aside the tales of Homer and the wisdom of Aristotle, and instead diving into folk wisdom, into local history. Savigny would eventually request Jakob to be his research assistant in Paris, and Jakob dropped everything to take this opportunity, derailing his university career. And although this was a very risky move, everyone in his life, including his mother, approved of the decision. Somehow they knew that this was something that he needed to do. But as important as this stint in Paris would end up being to his later scholarly efforts, it also meant that the brothers had to be separated once more. And again, you can see in their letters the pain and frustration that being divided by space gave them. But by 1805, the brothers were together again, moving in with their mother and sister in Kassel, where they had first attended school. As joyful as this reunion was, their living situation was still as dire as ever. Despite their education, Jakob and Wilhelm struggled to find work, and tragically, in 1808, their mother, Dorothea Grimm, died. To make things all the worse, it was right around then that the French arrived in Kassel.
For the penguin, no jet.
Just some ads playing here, won't be a moment.
Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte had been sweeping his way across Europe throughout the 1800s, and his armies reached Kassel in 1806. Napoleon positioned his youngest brother, Jerome Bonaparte, as the new King of Westphalia, and Kassel was the capital of the new realm. And it was actually in the castle of this new French king that Jakob finally found work. Perhaps it was because he was the best one for the job, or perhaps it was just because he was the only academic in town desperate enough to take a position under their new French overlords. Jakob was given the job of being the royal librarian, caring for over 12,000 books in their collection. His only real job was to look after the books and to make sure that nobody but the approved people, the king, the queen, and of course himself, the royal librarian, was allowed to ever look at the books. And fortunately for him, the royal couple was not very much into reading, so he kind of just had the library to himself, and he had a lot of downtime. Meanwhile, Wilhelm's already fragile health was just getting worse and worse, so he was sent away to an experimental doctor for treatment. And when I say experimental, I really do mean experimental. He was fed pills that made him vomit. Every morning his neck would be rubbed with mercury, which, yes, is incredibly toxic, which is what we now know. And they even played with the new technology of electricity, using a primitive car battery, basically, to run electricity through his body in the hopes of settling his heart. Wilhelm, understandably, didn't really enjoy these treatments, but he found refuge in this time in learning about the local folklore and folk music. And you know what? Something that they did to him must have worked, because eventually the treatments started to make him feel better, and he was able to return to Kassel and to his family. Still trapped under the thumb of the French, but with plenty of free time because of Jakob's employment and Wilhelm's continued unemployment, the brothers found solace in diving deeper into German culture. Inspired by Romanticism, they believed that fairy tales, the fairy tales of the German people, contained some kind of quintessential Germanness, and they thought that preserving the integrity of that Germanness would be key to preserving the spark in the hearts of the German people. Wilhelm would later describe it. When a storm or some other catastrophe sent from the heavens levels an entire crop, we are relieved to find that a small patch, protected by tiny hedges or bushes, has been spared, and that some solitary stalks remain standing. When the sun shines once again and favors them, they will continue to grow alone and unnoticed. No sickle will cut them down too early so they can be stashed in a large silo, But late in the summer, when they are ripe and fully grown, some poor and pious hands will come searching for them. Ear on ear will be carefully bound in bundles, inspected, and attended to as whole sheaths. Then they will be brought home and serve as the staple food for the entire winter. Perhaps they will be the only seed for the future. This is how it seemed to us when we began examining the richness of German literature in earlier times, and saw that nothing much had been preserved from that richness. Determined to preserve what was left of the storytelling tradition of bygone days, the brothers began to collect fairy tales. Now, the contemporary impression seems to be that the Brothers Grimm gathered these stories themselves, that they canvassed across Germany, going door to door, hearing these stories firsthand. But that's not entirely accurate. In certain special cases, they were able to do so, such as in the case of their neighbors, the Wilds, who were literally their next-door neighbors. They had 4 daughters who really enjoyed telling stories, and some of the tales that we get in the very first volume of Grimm Fairy Tales come from those sisters. And in some cases, the brothers had to get a bit creative about how they collected their stories because not everyone was willing to give them up to some random academic. According to one account, they traded an old man his stories in exchange for a couple of pairs of their old trousers, and they actually stayed in communication with that old man, and he would frequently send them letters asking if they had any other used trousers that he could take, which I think is nice. And then in other cases, they would have to send in children to little old ladies to get them telling their stories, because the little old ladies didn't want to tell their stories to grown men. But for the most part, the Brothers Grimm asked other people for help. They sent out to their colleagues and fellow scholars, requesting that they record any snippets of folk tales that they might hear. Everything from the old washerwoman talking around the well, to the thief in a prison cell, and just about everyone in between. In 1811, they sent out an open letter requesting that anybody who has fairy tales, send them in. It didn't matter, Jakob said, if the stories taught a lesson, or were just fun to listen to, whether they were happy or sad. What was important was that the person writing down the story should capture every word the teller said, even if the story didn't make sense the way that it was told. The Brothers Grimm certainly were not the first scholars to ever think of recording folklore, but you could argue that for their time, they were the best. A lot of other recorders of the time would only take very vague notes on the original orally told story, and then it was accepted practice for them to embellish, change, and sometimes entirely make up the rest of the story from that base line. They could make the stories do whatever they needed them to do in order to confirm their scholarly intent. The Brothers Grimm, however, were comparatively far more mindful, although that's not to say that they didn't change anything. For example, in the original Snow White, the orally told version of the story, the evil stepmother was actually Snow White's mother, but that didn't quite fit in with what the Brothers Grimm were trying to do, and they firmly believed in the goodness and purity of the role of a mother, so they changed it from being a wicked mother to a wicked stepmother. And while that is a significant change, it doesn't really change the message of the story all too much. Plus, the convention of the wicked stepmother was something that they saw in other tales, so it wasn't a particularly difficult or a seriously transformative change to make. So they certainly did change things, but they really worked hard to preserve what they saw as a story's essential truth. Wilhelm Grimm once compared it to cracking open an egg. When you crack open an egg, there's always going to be a little bit of white that gets left behind in the shell. It's inevitable and you could try and scrape it out, but you're just going to lose some of it. But what's important is that the yolk stays intact. And especially compared to other scholars of their day, the Brothers Grimm were really mindful of keeping the truth, that yolk of the story, intact and discernible even in their rewritten stories. By modern standards, they editorialized a bit, and it's hardly a spot-on, first-hand account, but especially in the context in which they were operating, the scholarly work that the Brothers Grimm did was groundbreaking. One scholar who wasn't quite so concerned with maintaining integrity was an old friend of the Grimm brothers, Clemens Brentano. Brentano had also been working on a fairy tale compilation at the same time as the Brothers Grimm, but his work was far less precise and mindful. In fact, some of the storytellers that the Grimms approached had had previous encounters with Brentano, and
if your home is sum insured, you could discover. That's why it matters.
Whatever he did, they were so scarred by the experience that these storytellers refused to share their tales with any other scholars, including the Grimms. Still, the brothers wanted to hold on to that friendship, and so when Brentano requested a copy of their manuscript for him to examine, of course they gave it to him. Fortunately, they did make a separate copy of the manuscript before they handed it over, which was good because Brentano took that manuscript and never gave it back. In fact, it went missing for decades and was only fairly recently found. Despite trials and disagreements and a whole lot of work, in 1812 the Brothers Grimm published Kinder- und Hausmärchen. The title translates to the Children's and Household Tales, and it contained 86 of their collected stories. And although this was called Children's Tales, it was not originally intended to be a book for children. Rather than having illustrations or etchings, you know, the stuff kids kind of like to see in their books, this book contained footnotes and assiduous notes on all of the stories and where they came from. Jakob explained that although the book very well could be enjoyed by children, it was originally intended as a serious scholarly pursuit, intended for adult consumption. This was a misconception that would continue to reoccur throughout the fairy tale work of the Brothers Grimm. While children really enjoyed the book and they devoured the stories, a lot of the educators and adults in their lives were a bit more skeptical. Not only was the book dull and illustrationless, it was also, throughout most of it, incredibly dark. There are some seriously bloody and brutal moments in those stories that you could argue are not acceptable for children. In fact, there's one of the stories that I'm going to share later on that was deemed so brutal and horrifying that it was cut by the Brothers Grimm from later publications of their books. Jakob would remain steadfast in the idea that this book was not intended for children and that it should not be adjusted to pander to them. It was written to be a scholarly preservation of German culture. Wilhelm, however, did begin to change his mind over time. Wilhelm had always been a bit more of the romantic between the two of them. Jakob was very much dedicated to the facts, and Wilhelm was more interested in larger spiritual truths. And he was willing to pivot their work to cater more towards a younger audience.
And interestingly, it was Jacob Grimm that wrote the book Teutonic Mythology, getting into really, Indo-European and paganism and stuff like that. So, yeah, I think she's right. And this is actually very, seems accurate to me. So let's just keep going. We've got about 14 minutes left.
This is something that would be a bit of a point of friction between the two of them when they were working together. But on the second collection of fairy tales, Wilhelm would have the chance to pivot their intent however he liked. 1812 was a really rough year to be Napoleon Bonaparte. The French were facing defeat in Russia, and higher-ups like King Jerome were beginning to see the writing on the wall. He began to pull out of Kassel, and while they were trying to work on the second book, he kept Jakob very busy collecting up German books and art to smuggle with him as he fled for France. And once Napoleon's defeat was finalized, Jakob was kept even more busy with politics. He was sent to Paris from 1814 to 1815 to recover German art and literature that had been taken by the French. It was during this lengthy separation that a lot of the work was done to compile the second edition of Grimm's fairy tales, meaning that most of it was done under Wilhelm's hand. And as always, when the brothers are physically separated, we get a lot of very angsty letters where they're getting upset about miscommunications due to just how long it takes to get a letter from France to Germany. The second volume, when it was published, wasn't quite the smash hit that the first one was, but it did a lot to establish the Brothers Grimm as the voice in German folklore. The brothers would be reunited in 1816, and fortunately, they would never be seriously parted again. They would continue much of their work together, editing and recompiling fairy tales, exploring German folklore and history, and doing some groundbreaking work on the study of the German language. In 1825, Wilhelm would marry Dorothea Wilde, one of their former next-door neighbors who had contributed stories to the first volume of Grimm fairy tales. Jakob would never marry, but he did live out the rest of his life in the same house as Wilhelm, Dorothea, and their 4 children. Over their years, they spent time as librarians, professors, and members of the Academy of Sciences, and in 1838, they began work on the Deutsches Wörterbuch, the most comprehensive German dictionary ever created. Wilhelm passed away in 1859, and Jakob would carry on after him just 4 years later, but they left behind a remarkable legacy, be it their linguistic studies, their scholarly practice, and of course their preservation of German culture at an incredibly volatile point in history. Adaptations like the Disney princess movies, loving satires on the original fairy tale stories, and yes, even the edgy, gritty 2010 dark fairy tale remakes, none of these would have been able to exist without the groundwork laid by the Brothers Grimm. And yet, there are a lot of stories from these collections that aren't quite as well known, but they can tell us a lot about the values that these tales wanted to promote, the questions and controversies around them, and how these stories were crafted and changed throughout time and space. Let's begin with my new favorite ever fairy tale, The Mouse, the Bird, and the Sausage. This story begins, as so many do, with a mouse, a bird, and a sausage getting together and buying a house. And at first they are experiencing domestic bliss. They each have their own special jobs. The bird goes out into the forest to gather wood. The mouse stays home and takes in water from the well, starts the fire, and sets the table. And the sausage, of course, does all of the cooking. And as a final step to all of the cooking, he takes his little body and slithers through the food to season it so that it's perfectly salted every time. It's just the perfect setup, and they've got an excellent thing going. However, one day, the bird gets talking with another bird, and that other bird is like, hey, to me, it looks like you're doing most of the work in the house. Because after they finish cooking, the mouse and the sausage get to relax. They don't have to do anything, but it's the bird who has to wake up early in the morning and spend all day gathering wood. The bird insists that they try and change jobs for a day, and so they draw lots to decide who's doing what, and their fate is sealed. The sausage goes out into the wild to gather firewood, and the results are disastrous. Not far from their home, the sausage had encountered a dog. Now, this dog had considered the sausage free game, and had grabbed him and swallowed him down. The little bird arrived and accused the dog of highway robbery, but it was of no use, for the dog maintained that he had found forged letters on the sausage, and therefore the sausage had had to pay for this with his life. With the sausage dead for his so-called crimes, the bird flies home to find even more chaos. The mouse had been making dinner, and since he had seen the sausage cooking, he knew that the final step was to slide your body through the vegetables. But the mouse isn't greasy enough, and he gets stuck halfway through, and he burns to death between the potatoes. When the bird returns, he can't find the mouse anywhere, so he throws the firewood all across the floor so that he can search for the mouse. But the firewood then catches on fire, and the whole house is consumed in flames. The bird rushes to the well to try and get a bucket out, but the bucket falls in and pulls the bird in behind it, and the bird drowns. Truly, you can learn just so many lessons from this story. You don't carry forged papers. Cops might eat you if you're an anthropomorphic sausage, and you really shouldn't try and slip and slide through a pan of hot vegetables if you aren't greasy enough. And perhaps, most importantly,
introducing Grammarly like you've never seen before. Your all-in-one
change up a good thing. Although it may look like sausage, and you really shouldn't try and slip and slide through a pan of hot vegetables if you aren't greasy enough. And perhaps, most importantly, you shouldn't change up a good thing. Although it may look like it, the grass is not always greener on the other side. And even if it looks like your friend has the easier side of things, it might not go so well trying to walk a mile in their shoes. I will be honest that I first read this story because it had a mouse in the title, and you guys know how I feel about rodents. But I've been thinking about this story for days, and I need as many people as humanly possible to hear it. And maybe a great way for me to get the word out about the mouse, the bird, and the sausage would be to build it its own platform using this video's sponsor, Squarespace. Squarespace is the all-in-one website building platform that's going to 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Thanks so much to Squarespace for sponsoring this video, and thanks to all of you for checking out my sponsors. So, the mouse, the bird, and the sausage is, I can admit, ridiculous, but this next one is not, and it is very gruesome and bloody, so if you want to skip it, go ahead to this timestamp. In the story titled How Some Children Play at Slaughtering, we meet a couple of 5- and 6-year-old kids who are playing butcher together. One of them is the butcher, the other is the assistant who's holding a bowl to catch the blood in, and then one of the children is cast as the pig in this game. Imitating the butchers that they've watched, they pin down the pig, cut its throat, and collect the blood. One of the townspeople sees what has happened, and they panic, and they grab the kid who has done the murdering and take him before the local court. There, they just have no idea what to do until a wise man suggests that the judge presents the boy with an apple and a gold coin. If the boy took the apple, he was to be set free. If he took the coin, he was to be killed. The judge took the wise man's advice, and the boy grabbed the apple with a laugh. Thus, he was set free without any punishment. In the first edition, this was followed up by a part 2, which is somehow even more brutal, so I'm not going to share it here. But that story was deemed so gruesome that it was taken out of later editions of the Brothers Grimm stories. It only appeared in the very first publication. And this was actually something that Jakob himself protested heavily. Apparently this was one of the stories that had come from the mouth of their own mother, and Jakob remembers that after hearing the story, he certainly played a lot more carefully. There definitely was value to the story. And while I get why you probably wouldn't want kids reading that one, I think that in the original intended context of it being a collection of folk stories for adults, it makes a lot of sense to have that story in there. While it is a warning to children to play carefully, it's also a really interesting exploration into the culpability of children. At what age does a child become fully responsible for their actions? At what age should their conscience prevent things like that from happening? No one likes to consider the fact that children can do really terrible things, but sometimes they do. And this story presents something very interesting. The child is allowed to choose between an apple, the instant gratification and sweet treat of an apple, versus a gold coin, which is something that an adult would certainly choose over an apple. And the child chooses the apple, meaning that in all likelihood he just didn't understand the seriousness and the adultness of the act that he was performing. It asks questions about who is accountable when a child does something wrong. Is it the butcher who allowed the children to watch as he slaughtered pigs? Was it the child himself who had no comprehension of his action? Or was it maybe even the parents who probably should have been watching their kids a bit closer? This isn't a fun story, and it's probably not one I'd, bring to story time at the local library, but it does what the best stories do. It asks questions that provoke us to think further. Our third story is way less brutal, and that is the tale of the old woman in the forest. It tells of a servant girl left all alone in the forest after her employers are killed by robbers. She cries and cries, thinking that she's going to die out there, but then she's saved by a dove holding a key. The golden key unlocks a nearby tree where she finds an entire cache of delicious food. She eats, and when she grows tired, the dove brings her another key. She unlocks another tree to find a beautiful bed for her to sleep in, and another tree where she finds a whole wardrobe full of beautiful clothing. After many days of living in luxury in the forest, the dove asks her for something in return. "I'm going to lead you to a small cottage," said the dove. "You are to go inside, where you'll find an old woman seated right next to the hearth. She'll say good day to you, but you are not to answer her, no matter what she does. Go past her to the right, where you'll come upon a door. Open it, and you'll find a room where there'll be lots of different kinds of rings lying on a table. You'll see magnificent ones with glistening stones, but you're to leave them alone. Pick out a simple one that will be lying among them, and bring it to me as fast as you can." The girl hastens to obey, enters the home, and ignores the old woman, even as she screams at the girl to stop. And finally, she makes her way into the room that the dove described. While she was looking for the ring, she noticed the old woman slinking by with a bird cage in her hand. The woman was about to make off with it, but the maiden went up to her and took the cage out of her hand. When she lifted it up and looked inside, she saw a bird with a simple ring in its beak. She snatches the ring and runs, but returns to find her dove nowhere to be seen. While she's waiting, she leans against a tree, but suddenly that tree begins to move. Its branches wrap around her, and when the girl turns around, she finds that the tree has become a handsome young man, and the two embrace. He explains that he is actually a prince, and that him and his servants and his entire house have been turned into trees by the wicked witch. He was able to become a dove for a few hours every day, but so long as the old woman had the ring, he was trapped. By stealing the ring, the girl has freed him, and they ride off into the sunset together.
All right, that's all we have time for here on Otherworld Connections, Revolution Radio. Yeah, we might have to pick up where we left off. Yeah, shout out to Metal Rabbit in the chat. Thanks for following along and joining in with your comments. Sorry I didn't get to call out some of the stuff you were mentioning, but you suggested storytellers in Ireland. We're going to have to look into that, that's for sure, and we might pick up where we left off next week. Thanks so much, Metal Rabbit. Yes, that was fun and more informative than I thought it was going to be. So that's cool, and we'll continue on with it next week. So thanks so much for tuning in. Much love, everyone, and we'll see you at the next one. Take care, everyone. Bye for now.